Hello and welcome to a new kind of Let's Play Poorly. As always, music is by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. And yeah, so if you've been watching my YouTube videos, you know that I love me some space games, but you may not know that I also love to make space games, or one space game in particular. It is a game based on the ideas of things like Starfleet Battles and Babylon 5 Wars. Not one of the simpler ones like Star Wars Armada, but a little bit crunchier. And it's got that pedigree of, especially Babylon 5 Wars, which is sort of where it developed from initially, where I got my ideas to build a ship design system. And then from there, it just kind of blossomed into its own system entirely. I've been working on it for the better part of the past 15 years, and it is now finally in a playable state. It is playable. It's got all the rules are pretty much set. A bunch of ships have been made. Now it's just a matter of balancing, which I've been working on. And the way I've been working on it is I created a tabletop simulator version of it, at least for 2 ships, so that I can do some initial testing. And this is it. So very quickly, I'm going to give you a quick look at the website, which is right here. And the name of the game is Cold Infinity UVSC, Cold Infinity Universal Vectored Space Combat. So as you read from here from the website, Cold Infinity is a tabletop space combat game by me. It was originally designed as a generic rule set capable of converting ship designs from another system, Babylon 5 Wars. It has evolved into an independent engine and is now completely distinct from its origins. Cold Infinity is non-hex based and simulates simplified inertial spaceflight in a 2-dimensional game area. It also features a robust ship and weapon design system that lets players build entire fleets for their own game universes or for universes from other media. Counters are designed to be mounted on 39mm poker chips, making them sturdy and easy to use. So this is completely free to use. You are welcome to come to the website. I will put a link in the description. It's coldinfinity.wikidot.com. And as you can see here, there's some documents that are available for download. The rule book, the table book, universe book, play sheets, and universe book counters. And I'm going to be adding some more things once I've reached a more finalized state. So what I'm going to be doing in this playthrough series is playing through a few combats, partially to showcase the system, but also kind of to play test it, because like I said, I've been tweaking some things and adjusting some values and putting together some ships for it. And not all of them are great. They don't all work completely yet, the ships that I've built. I just kind of slapdash them together to a degree, and I'm going to tweak them as I go. I'm a solo dev here. I'm just doing this all by myself. I'm doing the testing by myself. If anybody wants to play using the tabletop version of the rules, feel free. At some point, I will put the tabletop simulator version on Steam Workshop once I've gotten a few more ships available. So let's go through here what this table has. First up, this table has the rules. So I will be showing you that in a couple of minutes to show you the rule set here, the play aids, the table book, the universe book, and some of the counters. But over here is the play field, the play area. Now, just think of this as being on an actual table, right? If you've never done Tabletop Simulator before, it's basically a digital version of a real space. Some of it can be automated. There's really no automation in this version because I'm not a programmer, so I don't know what the hell I'm doing about that. But think of this as an actual table that you are actually playing the game on. I'm going to turn down the music just a smidge because it's a little loud in my ears. It may be a little loud in yours. There we go. So yeah, so this here is the play mat, the play board. It's this open space here. No hexes or anything like that. The original version of this game was hex-based, but I decided to move away from that and put it on just a regular mat. You just, basically all you need is a table. You don't need a map board. I decided to make a nice little spacey map here with some NASA photography. And then back here, this is player 1 right now, and over here is player 2. So let's take a look at these 2 players. The most important thing to look at here is the ship designation silhouette, the SDS. This is the ship itself that you're going to be flying, and there's going to be the ability, there already is the ability to make your own, and I currently have like 25 or so ships already made in my universe book over here, which, like I said, I will show shortly. So this is the ship, and I have made this little panel here editable in TTS, Tabletop Simulator, but the actual sheets, actually, let me go ahead and show one right now. Let's see, here's the universe book. So you can see here, these are various ships. There are two formats for each unit. There's the one where it's simplified, where you just see the parts of the ship, the systems, all in a list, and the other one where it has this nice graphical representation, which can be a little bit harder for some people to kind of grok, but is much more visually appealing. So I'm going to be playing with that. But as you can see here, you got these different ships available. Like I said, each one has two types, right? Two sets. So that's, let's see if I can find a good one here. There we go. So this one here has 3 sections, or you can see it's got 3 sections in its visual representation and so on. So let's go back over here to this one. This is the UNC, United Nations and Colonies Cudgel Destroyer. And this is how it is laid out. See, along the top, we've got the main block for information, which is the construction point cost, which is how many points it costs to field this ship in the game. So the game doesn't have a campaign system yet, so you would just be basically collecting a bunch of ships on one side, a bunch of ships on the other, totaling up their costs and seeing how relatively well balanced they are, and then duking it out. So this is the power requirement. Most ship systems require power to operate, and then that's how much it requires. This thing in parentheses just means that most systems will need 14, and if there are things like hyperdrives and automatic repair systems or whatever, those will add to the power requirement. But since those don't usually operate, those aren't usually on, you don't need to worry about them most of the time. Then there's the mass, which is just this abstraction of how chunky the ship is, and then the amount of ramming damage it can do. Power available based on reactors and capacitors and batteries and so forth. Basically, you want to make sure that the power available is greater than the power required based on what you've got currently running. Then over here we have thrust cost and pivot. Thrust is essentially treated as points of thrust. It's a reactionless mass system, so you don't have to keep track of fuel and all that stuff. But yeah, so it's going to cost 2 points to accelerate by 1 inch along the map. Everything is done in inches. You can do it in centimeters. It's an easy conversion, of course, and it's kind of arbitrary in that respect. So it doesn't really matter if you go with, say, 2 centimeters as the distance, or 3 centimeters, or an inch, or inch and a half. Really just depends on how big your table is. And then pivot is the number of degrees you can turn with 1 point of thrust applied. And again, I will explain all of this as we start playing. You don't have to know all of this right now, certainly, and the rules over here go into greater detail. But yeah, so the pivot is the number of degrees it'll turn, up to 60 degrees with a single point. And then we've got these silhouette values here, forward and aft, port and starboard. This is essentially a bonus to hit this ship. If you are in front of it or behind it, you use this number because it's a thin little guy. If you're to the left or right, port or starboard, then you use this value because it is a little bit easier to hit. And then we have the whole ship here. It's also represented by a little icon here, which is a version of the counter, which you have up here, which is just sitting here on the table. Got one here, and this is the cudgel, this little guy here. And we have all of our weapons and other ship systems. So this guy has 2 Gauss cannons, 2 heavy autocannons, 2 pulse autocannons, and then in the middle section here, it's got some sensors, command and control, it's got a reactor, and it's got an engine, which is what generates the thrust, which then pushes through the thrusters here, 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 and here. It's also got armor, which is this number here. It's got an armor covering each section, the forward section, the core section, and the aft section. The core section is technically inside the forward and aft section, like a Russian doll. Core sections are not exposed to space, unless it's a single section ship, in which case obviously it's only a core section. But this one is a 3-section ship, so it's got a forward chunk, an aft chunk, and inside that in halfway between them, essentially, in the middle, is the core. And this is where kind of the soft underbelly stuff is, like the CIC, which is like your bridge, your combat information center, your sensors, your engine, your reactor, so on. Except we've got armor, and then we also have hull structure here, which is basically all the other junk that isn't weapons and combat related stuff. Oops, I did not mean to do that. That was unintentional. Didn't need to do a little panel there. Okay. And that basically is just kind of hit points for this front part, hit points for the back part, hit points for the center. And these numbers here on the left are the total hit points at the start of the game. And then over here on the right are the number of hit points that it currently has, which this in the tabletop simulator version is editable. But if you look over here in the actual universe book, you can see I have them as blank. These are basically boxes where you would fill in your information based on the number of hits it took and so on. All right, so what else do we want to look at here? So, as I said, we've got 2 Gauss cannons, 2 heavy autocannons, 2 pulse autocannons. Well, these have arcs of firing arcs, right? So this number here, these letters here in gray, AB, AB, F, C, EFA, BCD, all of these are reflected on this icon, or more importantly, they're reflected on your counter here. So, as you can see, these are labeled by letter, and these are the firing arcs. That means the weapons can fire out from these sections. So I'm currently, like, touching the center here. Oh, come on now. Am I? Oh, I'm actually not. Never mind. I want to be on the center. That's where I want to be. Yeah, so here we go. So A, B, C, D, and so on. So right now, relative to this guy over there, you can see, barely, there, he's a little far away, there we go. He's currently in the C arc. Right, so he's in that big arc right there. Well, that means the Gauss cannon and the Gauss cannon cannot fire at it because they're both only facing forward. This heavy autocannon cannot. This heavy autocannon can. So proceed. And then down here in the pulse autocannons, you see EFA and BCD. That means these have wider firing arcs that cover a larger swath. EFA means it goes from E to F to A. BCD means it goes from B to C to D. Technically, what that essentially is saying is that port side 180 degrees, starboard side 180 degrees. The reason it's listed and labeled this way is so that it's very easy to just kind of do a limited number of arcs. AB is here. Gauss cannons are A and B. Heavy autocannon is only F. And then pulse autocannon here is E and F and A, which gives you the full sweep. If we go over here to this other ship, it's got its own types. It's got A, B, C, and D. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. That's because that ship is a different, obviously physically different, has different kinds of weapons, and so on. All right, so what is next? We've got our weapon information blocks here. So the heavy autocannon is a matter weapon. It's slow speed in terms of being able to do defensive fire against incoming attacks. There are 4 speeds, 1, 2, 3, 4. Matter is the slowest. It's configured in burst type of configuration, which I'll get to in a little bit, but basically it just means it does one single shot. Boom. Damage, it does 3d10, so 3 of these 10-sided dice. It's got a range of -1 per 3 clicks, and a click is an inch in the way the game's nomenclature works. So that means that it takes a penalty for every 3 inches of range. And you always round up. Basically, the rule of thumb in this game is you always round up, or you round against the favor of the player. Like, so against the player who is doing the rounding. So this guy, 28.7 inches, that's 29 inches. So for every 3 inches, it loses 1 point on its to hit. So that's, let's say, well, that's 30 roughly. Again, you round up, right? So that would essentially be a -10 to hit. He's not getting anywhere close to that thing if he shoots. The Gauss cannon's even worse. It's got a range of -1 per 2 clicks. Pulse autocannon, -1 per click. And then over here, the pulse autocannon is -1 for every 2. So the best one on this ship is the heavy autocannon. Next up is drop off, which doesn't matter for the weapons on this ship or the other. Basically, some kinds of weapons do less damage over distance, but this particular one does not. Then you have a rate of fire number, which is telling us that it can fire one time, and then it does not have to wait to cool down before it can fire again on the next turn. Other weapons are different. This one, this Gauss cannon here, has a rate of fire of 1 + 2. And what that means is that it can fire once on a turn, and then it must wait 2 more turns before it can fire again. So it fires, waits, and then fires, and then waits, and then fires, and so on. And so that's a relatively slow gun. It's not the slowest in the game, but it is pretty darn slow. Over here, we've got a pulse autocannon that does 2 + 0, which means it can fire twice every turn and then does not have to wait in between. So it can fire twice, then on the next turn it can fire twice, then on the next turn it can fire twice, and so on. Then we have accuracy. So accuracy is a positive or negative number, which is just a bonus to hit, or a penalty to hit. So in this case, we've got an accuracy bonus of +2, and over here we've got an accuracy bonus of 0. What this functionally means is that for the first, 4 inches of distance, that range penalty is offset. So out to about here, right, out to about there, it essentially negates the penalty to hit based on range. And then finally, DF, which is defensive fire. It's in 3 numbers, which I'll get to, but basically 3 different kinds of defensive fire. It is going to give a negative to hit on the opponent trying to strike this ship if this gun is being used for defensive fire. Basically, it's shooting out into space, hoping that it will distract, but basically force the computer on the other ship to make calculations that create errors and prevent it from actually striking the target. Very last thing to look at here on these panels is this stuff here. These specific special features of the various weapons. Switching delay, we probably won't encounter that in this game so far because of the way it works. Essentially, it means that if you switch between regular fire and defensive fire, it has to wait a turn in between. This Gauss cannon can only be fired against starships. It has anti-armor, which means that it does damage to armor on the opposing ship. And it can use special ammunition. We're not going to use special ammunition on this because I want to keep this as simple as I can make it, just to start with for the tests. Over here, we've got erratic trajectory, which means that when it fires multiple rounds against the same target, its defensive fire the enemy's defensive fire doesn't operate on half of its shots, because this thing is over-calculating and kind of making sure that the defensive fire cannot interfere as much. Rapid fire means basically if you give it extra juice, extra power, it can fire an additional round per turn. And then again, it's got a switching delay. All right, so let's go over here and look at this guy. This is the Elahi Morukiri support destroyer. Now, I've already run through this test a couple times. This ship is not really designed to fight against the other one. It is more of a support vessel for a variety of reasons. It is not meant to be a true combat ship on its own. But that's okay. It's going to encounter the enemy and it's going to do its best. So up here, as before, we have our construction point cost, power requirement, the mass, power available. This 24 and then 44 here means that it's got 24 power initially available, but it's got a battery that can hold 20 more points of power. Thrust cost, pivot, and then the silhouettes. This is what it looks like here. Now, if you may have seen over on this side, over here, this one is divided into 3 sections: forward, fore, and aft, which is also represented on its little icon here. Forward and aft. Over on this guy, It's the other way around. It's got a port side, a starboard side, and a core. So port, starboard, and core. This one's built essentially in terms of the size. It's the same. It's the same mass, 15.9, but it's built not exactly a little wider than it is tall or long, but kind of squarish, right? All right, let's take a look at what we've got here. So again, we've got our thrusters here. These are acceleration thrusters. That's what the A means. It means that it's used to accelerate or decelerate the ship. It's got two up front. Each one of these can use 1 point of thrust. And over here, we've got two aft thrusters that are both acceleration thrusters. Each one can use 2 points of thrust. Because the thrust cost is 2, that means this thing can accelerate up to 2 plus 2, 4, so up to 2 total inches per turn. But it can only decelerate 1 inch per turn because the thrust cost is 2, and it can only output a total of 1 plus 1 equals 2. Over here on the port side and starboard side, we have maneuvering thrusters, which are used with the pivot. So it can pivot 60 degrees per point. This one can output up to 2, and this one can output up to 2 as well. So it could pivot up to 120 degrees in a single turn. Bigger ships will have a much smaller pivot and probably not much bigger, stronger thrusters, which means they will be a little bit more lumbering, a little bit slower to maneuver. And that's just part of the way the design is set up. When you design your ships, the bigger they are, the harder they turn. Okay, so on this port side, we have a couple of proton bolters. Starboard side, we've also got proton bolters. We have a fusion shield and a fusion shield, and we've got a fusion net back here. We have a deflection shield and a deflection shield. We've got sensors, CIC, capacitor, engine, and a battery. Capacitors are power plants like reactors. The difference is that reactors will always replenish their full total power every turn. So it can do 25 points of power, make 25 points of power, and it will recover 25 points of power on the next turn. Capacitors don't always do that. This one is rated 24/12. It has 24 points of power, but it only recovers 12 every turn. That's what the battery is for. It holds 20, and it starts the game with, well, I've decided, it starts the game with all 20 points in there. If you want to add battery power to it, you take 4 points, that's what this number here is, 4 points off the capacitor, and it creates 1 point in the battery, so that you'll have a little bit of extra juice if you need it. Fusion shields are defensive equipment that are used to defend other ships, so we will not be using them in this particular playthrough because, well, the Morokiri is the only ship on its side. It's not going to be doing much of anything helping anybody else out, which is why it's likely to die. So we will not be using the fusion shields. It does, however, have deflection shields, which essentially provide 5 points as a negative dice roll modifier when the enemy tries to attack it. It's got a shield, and it's a deflection shield instead of an absorption shield, so it basically makes things bounce off rather than just taking damage. All right, let's look here at our information. Proton Bolter is a particle weapon. It's got a speed of 3, which makes it much, much faster than matter weapons. What this also means is that the matter weapons on the other ship, which have a speed of 1, are too slow to be used as defensive fire against these particle weapons, because they just can't fire quickly enough. The particles will get right past them before the bullets get there. But the reverse is not true. Particle weapons are much faster than bullets, and so this can be used as defensive fire. It's configured as a pulse weapon, not a burst weapon, and I'll be talking about that as we get going. A pulse weapon has the possibility of doing multiple hits of damage beyond what it would normally do, as long as it's very, very accurate. It does 2 10-sided dice of damage. It's got a range of -1 for every 2 clicks, no drop-off, rate of fire of 2+0, an accuracy of +1, and a defensive fire of -2 and 0/0. So I'll tell you now what this is about. See, here we got a -2. What that means is that this ship, this weapon, can switch between regular fire and defensive fire pretty much whenever it wants to. During the turn, if it started out as an offensive weapon, but then the player realizes, oh crap, I might get into trouble here, I might need to put it into defensive mode, boom, defensive mode, no problem. The next one here, this one where it's a 0, is locked defensive fire. That means that on the turn that you're using that weapon, you gotta pick right at the start, and you don't get to change it. So on this one, this heavy autocannon doesn't have the at-will defensive fire, where it can just pick when it's time. It has to pick at the beginning of the turn, basically, and it can't change its mind. Finally, we've got emergency defensive fire, which is an exception to that. It can, in fact, change its mind. It just won't do as well. And also, there's also the chance that it'll take some damage as it switches over into that mode because it's an emergency situation and it's stressing out the system. All right, so that's our Proton Bolter. We've got a fusion shield, which we're not going to talk about, and the fusion net. It's also a radiation weapon, not a particle weapon like this other one. It's a burst configuration, does a little bit of damage, 1d10. It's got crap-ass range. -3 to hit for every inch of distance on the map. No drop-off, decent rate of fire, crappy accuracy, but really good locked defensive fire, -5. And here's where the thing is really useful. It's got electronic warfare as its special option. And what this means is that you can assign electronic warfare points to this weapon, which I will talk about in a little bit, and it gives it even beefier defensive fire. So really the function of this fusion net is to just be a defensive system. It's not really meant to be used offensively. It's mainly to be used as a net against, it's like a PDC in The Expanse, kind of, right? A point defense cannon. There are point defense cannons in this game as well, mainly on this side of the board with the UNC ships, but this particular ship doesn't have any, so that's fine. All right. So enough talk about all of that crap. Let's go over here and, whoop, I'm on the other side of the board. Let's go and take a look at the rules very, very briefly. We're at coming up on 30 minutes. I'm probably going to go a fair bit longer because this isn't really a let's play in the usual sense. This is more of a, hey, here's my system, and hopefully you'll try it out kind of stuff. So let's go look at this. This is the manual. Cold Infinity, Universal Vectored Space Combat, main rulebook, playtest pack, designed by me. My last update was on the 15th February, which was like 6 days ago. All right, so it's a 129-page long rulebook. Here are is the table of contents, right? So we've got the information about the turn sequence, how to allocate power, how to do electronic warfare, how to move, how to do weapons fire, and then how to do defensive fire and defensive systems. Small vessel combat. I haven't built any small vessels like fighters and shuttles yet. That's going to come next after I've done some iteration in the Starship playtest. How damage affects the systems. Translite drives, which is like hyperspace stuff, which generally don't get to have any use for in the base systems and base game. And advanced systems, and then ship construction and weapon construction. These are, I think, for me, the most interesting part of the game. Well, no, not the most interesting part of the game. I am a big lover of the GURPS role-playing system by Steve Jackson Games. I don't play D&D, I play GURPS. And GURPS has an enormous, big, chunky character design system, and basically that's my jam. So I've got like 20 pages worth of ship design and weapon design stuff here that you can do. And it's probably going to get longer as I expand the more detail that I do. So anyway, there we go. That's our rule set, which, like I said, is on the website. You're welcome to check it out. These are the play aids. We're going to look at this. I've already put the play aids on the tabletop simulator board, so we won't need to do anything with this, but you would basically print this out, some of it on cardstock, some of it not, and use that as your pieces or parts of your pieces. Excuse me a moment while I answer a phone call. All right, here we are. So this is the full turn sequence outline. This is if you were doing everything. If everything that the game throws at you that has to offer is what you're doing, this is the sequence of the turn. But don't panic. Most games won't have all of this. Most games will be this, the basic turn sequence outline. So it's basically 5 phases, 5 steps, really. Preliminary actions, which is just kind of setting things up for each turn. Power allocation, initiative, electronic warfare, and then firing missiles and torpedoes, which we're not going to be doing in this one because we don't have missiles and torpedoes on these ships. Then the movement step, then weapons fire is here, which is in 3 phases. Fire determination is basically where you kind of figure out what you're going to be doing, and that's where we do the defensive fire stuff, right? So you secretly determine them, you declare them, and then if you're like, oh crap, I've got an at-will defensive fire weapon that I'm going to need to use, you can switch it there, or switch your emergency defensive fire. And then once you've got that all done, you allocate it against specific shots, and then everybody announces what their electronic warfare levels are. We'll go through that as we go. Guided weapons, missiles and torpedoes. Starship weapons, fire, and then that's basically where all our 2 ships are going to be getting into their scuffle. And then basically the resolution of it, which is figuring out the damage effects, and then the final actions, inventory, reload racks, ship adjustments, things like that. Nothing too crazy on these sections over here. Most of the meat of the game is going to be movement and weapons fire. And after you've gotten a few turns in, it actually kind of becomes second nature pretty quickly. So we'll see how that goes. Oh, that I was not done with that. Next up here, this is a copy of the hit location chart, firing solutions, which I will get into, and then some crib sheets here for how armor works, how weapons work against hulls and systems based on their configuration. Like we saw burst, pulse. There's also slicing, slashing, flare, enveloping, and wave. And then this is the hit location chart, which we will definitely be getting into. This page is the turn-by-turn control sheet. Every player will have one for each ship that they are fielding, and you just fill it in with the starting information in this rating line. You fill in your weapons here, and then you go turn by turn by turn. Yeah, obviously, if there's more than 10 turns, you just kind of have to erase some and start over or whatever. Then you have a turn sequence highlights little card kind of thing here, which is an even smaller version of this page, right? And then a little crib sheet for the damage effects. This page here is the pulse accuracy table, which we will be using. This is what I was saying, like if you use a pulse weapon, the more accurate it is, the more hits it will make. These are the arc wheels and silhouette wheels, which we will definitely be getting into when we get into movement and we get into firing. I'll go into that into a lot more detail as we go. This is essentially what you need. Because there's not hex-based system here, you're using the arc wheels to figure out where things move. And this is an optional combination. If you just want to just have one and not have to worry about having 2 of them on the table, you just do, you have an arc wheel and a silhouette wheel on the outside of it. It's just a big chunkin' frisbee. And then finally, we've got some markers here, guided weapons, drones, vector markers. We'll be using those, at least we'll be using the vector markers down the road. And then finally over here, we've got the table book, I should mention, is mainly used when you're doing ship design, but there are some other things in here that are useful, just not useful necessarily right now for playing the game. It's mainly for learning the game is a lot of what's in here, and for designing ships and weapons. And then finally over here are the counters. Like I said, I got 25 ships right now. 17 of them are in the United Nations and Colonies, and the rest of these are the Alahi. So the ones we're playing with today are the Cudgel right here, and the Morokiri right here. But you can see we've got some small ships here, which are only one section, and they have guns that fire in the front. These guys have some different kinds of gun layouts. This one has a port and a starboard section. This one's forward and aft, and of course a core, and so on. And then over here, this one's got 4 outer sections and a core. This one's got 6 outer sections and core. And this one's got 6 outer sections and, oh, actually more than 1 core, but you don't see that on the icon. Okay. Now, with all of that done, let's freaking get going. All right, so we're going to start over here. Basic turn sequence outline. I have a little dude here, just so I can keep track of where I am. Power allocation phase. That's where we're going to start. So in this section, we resolve power deficiencies, collector panels, charge and transfer. We don't have those in this game so far, so we don't have to worry about it. Power plants recharge, and then we announce deactivations if we're turning off any particular things. So we're going to start with the cudgel. It requires 14 power, and it currently outputs, it says 25 up here. We get that information right here from the reactor, 25. So we're going to go over here to the turn-by-turn control sheet, and we're now on turn 1. Boink. All right, so over here, available power is 25. How much power is being used? So it could use 14, but what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of deliberately go through this. These little diamond numbers here are the power requirement for that particular system. Not all systems require power, but the ones that do definitely do. So Gauss cannon, 1, 2, heavy, 3, 4, 6, 8 for the pulse cannons here. And then the sensors, we've got 3 sensors, 2, 4, 6. So that gets us to 14. The engine, there's 2 engines. It's technically what's called a zero power system. That means that it doesn't actually draw power from the reactor, but if there is something that disrupts the power in the ship, let's say you fly through a nebula that you're not supposed to, which isn't in the game yet, but it will be someday. Maybe that disrupts your power. Zero power systems will get shut off along with all the other regular power systems. But systems that don't require power, like thrusters, the CIC, and so on, will not be shut off. So what did we count? We counted to 14, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. So if we have all of these powered systems running, it'll use up 14 points of power. We're not going to do rapid fire yet, but we will down the road. We'll be getting to that. So we don't need to add boosted power. So we're really just going to go with the 14. All right, so it's going to use 14 power. We certainly have enough. And that is good for the cudgel. Now we're going to go over and do the Morakiri. Sadly, I don't have a player 2, so it's just going to be me both ways. Turn 1. All right. Now this is where it gets a little dicey, because this thing, in order to run all of its systems, requires 17 points of power. It has 24, but it only recharges 12 every turn. So that's not going to be great. However, we do have a slight advantage here. Well, not advantage. We have a slight mitigation, which is that we're not going to be using the fusion shields. So we're just going to have those turned off the whole time, which means that that really drops down to 15 as a requirement. That still means, though, that we're going to be 3 short every turn, right? Every turn, it's going to use 15 and recharge 12. Use 15, recharge 12. Or actually, it's recharging 12, then using 15, recharging 12, then using 15. So it's going to drop by 3 every turn. So we're going to have to be a lot more careful about how we use power. We're probably going to have to turn off some things based on where it's facing, right? So for example, none of its right side weapons are going to be able to hit that thing right now. So we should, at the very least, turn off these 2 proton bolters, right? Because they only fire out the B firing angle here. So 2 and 4. We'll basically not be using 4 points. So 17 minus the 2 that we're not using on the shields, minus 4 that we're not using on these bolters right now, gets us to 11. So we're going to say available power is 11, and we're going to turn off these 2 bolters, right? And I didn't even bother putting the fusion shields in the weapons list because, like I said, we're never going to use them because they can't be used against the enemy, or they can, but what you wouldn't even like. Why would you do that? Your fusion shield has does almost no damage. It's pointless. So what we're gonna do then? We said we can do 11. Oh, sorry, that's not right. It's using 11. It's available is 24 plus the 20 that are in the battery, right? And we're not using the B-side bolters right now. So I'm just saying X cannot fire this turn because I'm just turning them off. So I'm remembering, nah, not gonna run. Okay, so I think we're good for power. Let's go up here and move our little go button. So we've resolved power deficiencies, right? Because we have a deficiency on one of them, kind of. Power plants have recharged. They start out fully charged in the first turn, so we're good there. Now, initiative determination. Initiative is really only for movement, because you do your movement based on, basically in initiative order. Faster ships have lower initiative, which means they move last, because they get an advantage. They get to see where everybody else has been, and then they get to move themselves. Weapons fire is done simultaneously, so you don't have to worry about initiative for that. All weapons fire all at the same time, so that all the damage effects happen after weapons, as you can see here. So I could shoot a gun at the enemy and blow up its gun, but it gets to shoot its gun back at me during this fire step, even though that gun is going to be maybe destroyed in the next step. All right, initiative determination. We come over here. Initiative determination is pretty straightforward. It starts out as the mass of your ship rounded up, or rounded to the nearest number, right? So nearest whole number. So in this case, it's 16. That's its base initiative rating. Oops, let me turn this down a little bit. Here we go. Starts at 16. Then you subtract half of its speed, which we're gonna say that they're starting at speed 0. And then on every turn after the first, you add, well, and you also do speed after the first as well. Speed doesn't apply in the first turn. Then on every subsequent turn, you essentially subtract half the speed and then add 1d6. And that's your initiative for that turn. Well, because this is turn 1, it is going to be identical with the base rating initiative. So we're going to say 16. Over here, this guy is just as heavy. So he's also going to have, nope, I did not mean to type A. Base is going to be, nope, not 16A. What are you doing, Kevin? 16. All right, so they're essentially going to move at the same time. You would then check against mass for the secondary check. And then if that doesn't work, you roll. Okay, so he rolled a 4. He rolled a 1. So that means this one has the higher initiative number. And so he is actually going to go first in the movement step. On subsequent turns, you take the initiative. Damn it, keep doing that. You take the initiative of the previous turn, subtract half the speed, add 1d6. And you do that each turn. You take the previous initiative and do those modifications. Now, the initiative total can never go more than 20 points away from the original initiative. So this could never get higher than 36 and can never go below -4. It'll just caps at that point. But the thing you learn pretty quickly is that the faster your ship goes, the lower the initiative is, which is to say, the later in the turn it moves, and therefore it will be able to position itself a lot more effectively if it's moving faster. Okay, so this sucker is going to go first. So now let's go take a look at what's next. He's going to go first in the movement step, but we're not there yet. Now we're at electronic warfare phase. So we're going to secretly determine our electronic warfare levels, and I'm going to pretend that I don't know exactly what I'm doing, right? I'm going to pretend that when I'm over here, I don't know what's happening over here, and when I'm over there, I won't know what's happening over here. Obviously, that's not going to be true, but we're gonna pretend. Okay, so how does electronic warfare work? Electronic warfare uses your sensors. It uses this rating here. So this is 8/4. What that means is that it has 8 points of electronic warfare available to it every turn. If I want to, I can push power into the sensors, and for every 4 points of power I push into the sensors, I get an additional point of electronic warfare. Now, I would have had to do that during power allocation, back when I was figuring out the power used and stuff. But I didn't do it because, I mean, we don't need to do it just yet. But it's something we will have to consider as they get closer together and things start to kind of go pear-shaped for somebody. So, since we're not doing any adjustments here, we're just going to say it's 8/4. Now, what we can use this for is a number of things. We can use it for what's called a shroud, which I'll get to in a second, amplification, which gives us a 2-hit bonus, and countermeasures, which is electronic countermeasures, which works as a negative dice roll modifier, negative DRM, when the other guy tries to attack me. When the cudgel tries to attack the Morakiri, and vice versa. I have 8 points to spend in these 3 sections. Shroud is essentially a bubble around the ship that is used to kind of activate its sensors. The sensors only are functional out to a certain range, which means 2 things. 1, amplification can only work against ships that are within the bubble, within the shroud, and if you're firing at something that's outside of the shroud, you double the range penalty when you're firing against it because you can't get a lock on, right? So one of the things that is very important to know is how far away your enemy is, or your enemies are, and whether or not you want to bother getting your shroud out that far. The way it works is 1 point is 10 inches, 10 clicks. So let's take a look. 10 clicks, that's right there. That would be a shroud of 1. That's a shroud of 2. That's a shroud of 3. The enemy is within range. Now, I should mention that the only part of this counter that matters as far as distances is the very, 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 very dead center. The rest of this isn't technically part of the ship. It's just the counter. The ship itself is right there. So I am technically looking at the distance between the 2 points in the center, 28.7. So this is a shroud of 3 would get me out to 30 inches. So are we going to do that? I think we might. Just cuts, why not? So we're going to say 3, and it gets us 30 inches of range. Whoops, don't mind those little arrows. That's me just clicking funny. Amplification, so I have 5 points left. I'm probably not going to be able to hit anything at that distance, because look at my guns here. -1 for every 2 clicks. That would be a -15 to hit. No matter what I do, I'm not going to really be able to overcome that. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use the rest of it for countermeasures. That means that if the other guy tries to shoot me, he has to subtract 5 from his 2-hit roll to hit me, because I have 5 points of countermeasures used in my electronic warfare. All right, got to deal with another thing. Be right back. All right, so one thing I should be clear about is amplification. If you're coming from a game like Babylon 5 Wars, maybe Starfleet Battles, don't quite remember. Amplification, target amplification, where you're using electronic warfare to give yourself a bonus to hit, usually works on a per ship basis. So I could amplify targeting on one ship, but any other ship in the area would not be amplified against, right? That's not the case in Cold Infinity. In my game, anything within this shroud, if you have amplification here, if I said, for example, if I did this instead, every single ship within those 30 inches, I would get a +3 bonus to hit against it. Doesn't matter if I'm targeting that one specifically. So, here we are. Stop that. Stupid ruler. Okay, so we've got here, our sensors are done on this one. So now we're going to go back over to this guy, and we're going to deal with his sensors. Now, this guy has 3 sensors. Each one is 4/8, which means each one has 4 points of electronic warfare, and 8 points of power will boost it by 1. So these are less efficient in terms of being able to boost power, but they do actually have total a lot more electronic warfare points, because this guy over here, right, he's only got 8. This guy over here, who is an actual combat ship, he's got 4, 8, 12, because he's got 3. So we're over here. Sensors, 12/8. There we go. Now, same shroud distance is, right, 30 inches will get us, it's going to be obviously the same, right? 30 inches. So we can definitely afford that. So we're going to go 3, gets us 30 inches. Now, amplification and countermeasures. So let's see. We're not going to be firing on anything this turn, I'm pretty sure, because I want to kind of do the first couple of turns without shooting, because it's going to be a lot of maneuver and moving, and that's why I start the game placing them this far apart. 30 inches is a fair distance. So we're gonna do it this way anyway, because this guy is aggressive, right? We're gonna say he's aggressive. So we're gonna give a +5 amplification and 4 points in countermeasures, just in case. Because they don't know each other, right? They don't know, they've never encountered each other before. They don't know what weapons they have. I do, but they don't. So he's not entirely sure that guy maybe doesn't have something that can fire an enormous gun like right at him at that range and not even take any range penalty, right? He doesn't know that. So he's gonna give himself a little bit of a hedge, but mostly he's doing amplification. So that's done. Now we kind of come over here. We don't have any guided weapons to launch, so we're fine. Finally, we come to movement. Now, first thing is derelict units. So if your ship is blown up and pieces are floating all over the place, that's when they move. Now, regular stuff is initiative movement phase, where you accelerate, decelerate, and maneuver. Do continuing maneuvers, which essentially is when you're doing things like, if you were pivoting last turn and you're going to continue pivoting, you just keep moving, or you had accelerated last turn and you're moving along, you're just going to keep moving in that same direction. Because this game does not play like a Star Wars movie. It plays, again, more like Babylon 5 or like The Expanse, where inertia matters and your ship will continue moving along the same course until you apply thrust in a different direction. All right, so we're going to start with this guy because he lost the initiative roll, that secondary roll that we had to do. So we're going to figure out what he's got. He's got engines that are 6/4. Similar to the sensors, he's got 6 points of thrust and 4 points of power would give him an additional point of thrust. We obviously did not allocate any of that at the beginning of the turn, so we're not going to use that this time around, of course. And it also isn't really going to matter anyway, because we're mostly going to be accelerating. Now, what we saw before is the thrust cost is 2. So I need to use 2 points of thrust to accelerate by 1 inch per turn. What does that mean? That means I can use both of these aft thrusters. Each one does 2. They can channel 2 points, right? 2 points out of the 6 available up here, which are also listed here, 6 and 4. 6 points are available. I can push 2 and 2. That would allow me to accelerate 2 inches per turn, right? Because I could use this one for 1 and this one for the other. I mean, obviously they're you kind of have to match them up. Well, you don't, by the game rules, you don't have to match them up. They don't have to be symmetrical, but I like them to be symmetrical because otherwise it just makes my brain itch a little bit if they're not symmetrical. Anyway, I think that's what we're going to do. We're going to use both of them at full power to accelerate by 2 inches per turn. Now, I didn't quite make this card up quite the way I wanted to. The full card, which we saw back in the play aids, has a whole bunch of things on here, and I cut them down for these. We don't actually have these 2 kinds of thrusters or these 2 kinds of thrusters. We just have forward, port, starboard, and aft on both ships. So you can safely ignore these lines, which is why I didn't put blocks in them to enter. So just ignore those. Some ships will have thrusters in other areas. Okay, so 2 and 2. So that means he can accelerate by 2. So now it's time to do all the complicated shit. So we're going to go here and we're going to grab a vector marker. Boink. And, ooh, it's too big. Hang on. This guy should be a little bit smaller. Let's scale you down to 0.5. Yeah. There. That's the right size. Okay. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's just when they're bigger, they kind of take up a lot of space. So what we're going to do here is we're going to move out from here 2 inches. Right? So I've just like plopped this on here so it's exactly in the center. And we're going to move 2 inches. And I have it in the tabletop simulator. I have it set up to track distance. But if you're doing this on a proper table, you just use like a string with inch marks on it, or a ruler, or a fabric ruler, or something like that. Pretty easy. And what we're going to do, because he is moving, he hasn't turned or anything, he's going to move in the direction of his nose, right? He's firing these aft thrusters that way, so he's going to move that way. So we're going to move him 2 inches, exactly along this center line. So that's his vector marker right there. So that's where he's going to go in a second. So now I'm going to hop him over here. Boink. I'm going to put him underneath. There we are. And then, so that I know where he's supposed to go next turn, in case if I don't change anything, I'm going to go ahead and put the vector marker right there. But that's for next turn. That's not for right now. Right? He's already moved his 2 inches. Next turn, he'll go another 2 inches over that way. Okay, so that's what he has done. Now let's go look at this guy. He has an engine that does 8/8, 8 points of power, or 8 points of thrust, and 8 points of power would increase that by 1. He's got a single aft thruster that does a full total of 4. So we're going to have him do essentially the same thing. He's going to fire all 4 points of thrust, which would normally send him this way. But what we're also going to do is we're going to have him rotate. Now you can rotate, you can have him pivot, and then accelerate, or accelerate and then pivot. It's up to you. I'm going to have him accelerate and then pivot. So he's going to start going this way, and then he's going to face in this direction. So that next turn I can kind of make him kind of go brrr, arc around a little bit. So here's how we're going to do this. So 4 points to the aft, and we're going to just have him pivot 60 degrees for now, which costs 1 point of thrust. Off the port side, because we're going to have him go clockwise. So firing the port thruster pushes him clockwise. All right, so here's how we do this. We gotta go. Oh yeah, we gotta grab ourselves another vector marker. Here we go. All right, there we are. And we gotta change his size because I forgot to set that right. There we go. There we go. All right. And we're gonna turn this around so we know whose it is. There we go. 2 inches in this direction. Boom. And then next turn, 2 more inches. Oh, that was not quite right. I mean, you know, it's a game. It doesn't have to be precise, but hey, because I can be, I will be. But in a friendly game, it doesn't matter that much. All right, so we've done the move, the acceleration. Now we need to do the pivot. So, because of the way Tabletop Simulator works, I can actually just set 60 degrees and go boink and done. Be done with it. Hey, that's super easy. But we're not going to do that. What we're actually going to do is we're going to do it the way that the game is designed for the tabletop. So we're going to grab the arc wheel, and we're going to stick it over there. Now, if you build one of these yourself, if you make one of these, you're going to cut out the center here so that when it goes over here, it's exactly like a donut, and it will just drop over top here like that. So we're going to go ahead, and we need to move this here to have the 0 degrees facing this way. Now, the way the game works is this game allows you to do things in 5-degree increments. Unfortunately, Tabletop Simulator does not allow that. It can only go down to 15 degrees. That's okay. We're not going to worry about it. But if we were to do it in 5-degree increments, you would turn it in however you need to. But what we're going to do is we need to go to 60 degrees, right? We need to turn this guy over to the 60-degree mark. So on the tabletop, you would literally just spin it. So we're going to boop, 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 boop. Oh, too far. There he is. 60 degrees. Boom. Done. Now, we can pull this away, but what is important to note, if we turn this as well, this now shows us, let me go ahead and do a straight up and down so we don't get anything detailed wrong. So this is the top-down view. Here we are. 0 degrees on the arc wheel, 0 degrees where we are. Now, what we know is that it is actually moving along 300 degrees. It's moving along 300 degrees. In fact, we could even adjust this just a smidge, right, to make it exactly right. Because we didn't quite get it in the center, right, in the spot. So there we go. It would be more like right there. 300 degrees is the direction of travel on the next turn. We're going to come down here. Oh, I should have done it. I should have done this over here. Sorry, I apologize. We're going to come up there in a second. His direction of travel is still 0, and his speed is 2, and he's not pivoting. Right? So that guy, all he did was accelerate. This guy over here accelerated by 2, pivoted plus 60 degrees, which means that on the next turn, if he doesn't unpivot, right, if he doesn't fire the starboard thrusters, he will actually keep going. He'll keep turning 60 degrees, 60 degrees, 60 degrees until you stop him. But the direction of travel is now 300, which means that on the next turn we'll know, okay, so he's supposed to be moving this way along the 300 line on the arc wheel. We can pull that away for now. But when we come back on the next turn, let's say it's been used for something else. We're going to go back here. Oh, let's turn it upside down. We're going to go find where the 0 mark is. It's right there. And then he's going to move 300 degrees. Well, along the 300 degrees line. Because I already have the vector marker here, we kind of don't have to worry about it. We know automatically that that's the case. But if you don't put out vector markers ahead of time, which you don't have to do, it's not part of the rules that you have to, it just makes it easier, then you would just drop your arc wheel donut over the top and figure it out from there. So we're going to slide that over there. Okay, so movement is done. So he moved 2, and then that's where he's going to be next time, and now he's facing there. Let's see how far apart they are from each other. They're now at 25, which is technically going to be 26 inches. That's, we always round up for this. Okay. Weapons fire step. We're not going to do any weapons fire. I won't really go into detail as to why, other than to say they're really far away from each other. That's 26 inches. There's no way that they're going to be able to fire 3d6, which is what you roll. And with all of their range penalties, there's no chance. Not even with the amplification that we have, that we did just for the sake of example. Even with that +5, I don't think we have a chance. But I'll show you how we know this. So if we're going here, you can see it's moving through the A. So that means any weapon that can fire through the A arc can fire, which in this case is the 2 Gauss cannons and 1 of the pulse autocannons. The Gauss cannon has a range of -1 per click, so that's 26. That's a negative dice roll modifier of 26. That ain't gonna work. Pulse autocannon, -1 per 2. That's going to be a -13. Even with my +5, which brings it to a -8, and some other things, I'm still rolling. I'm rolling 3d6. I need to roll at least an 11 with my dice roll modifier included to hit. Well, in order to do that against like a -8 or even something like a -6 or whatever, I have to roll really freaking high. So we're not going to try that. This is just a waste of time. So we're going to pass weapons fire, no damage, no final actions, and we go back now to turn 2. Now, over here, we do have the Proton Bolter, Fusion Shield. Proton Bolter is -1 per 2. Same problem over there. The Heavy Autocannon is -1 per 3, But unfortunately, neither one of them is in the A arc, so they can't fire. Right? So that's why we didn't even bother checking with them. Okay. Back to here. Preliminary action step. Power allocation. Now it's where it starts to get a little bit easier to kind of figure out, right? So the cudgel has 25 available power. Used 14. We're not going to change that this turn. Keep it at 14. Over here, used 11 by turning off the proton bolters on the right-hand side and turning off the 2 fusion shields. Let's take a look. If we take a look here at where they're going to be at the end of the movement step, he's still going to be left-hand side unless something changes, right? So let's go ahead and say proton bolter off on... Sorry about that. I'm sure that's probably making some people dizzy. We're going to keep these turned off. And what that means is that we're still back at 11. So 24 plus 20, we didn't have to worry about not having full power because we restore 12 every turn. Done. Okay. See how easy that was. Power allocation is done. Now we determine initiative. Okay. So we take 16 minus half speed, so we're at 15 plus 1d6. 1. So that actually brings us right back to 16. So we are still at 16 on turn 2. Now for the Morokiri. 16 minus half speed gives us 15 plus 4 is going to be 19. So that means this guy is going to move first, definitely, because his initiative is higher. He's chunkier, and he had a bad roll of the dice. Okay. Initiative is done. Now for electronic warfare. So, we are still within 30, right? We're not within 20 yet, so we can't drop our shroud size. But what if that changes at the end of movement? Let's see. Not quite. Still 22 inches if they don't do anything different. So I feel like both ships are going to decide to keep a full shroud. Right? They're both going to keep a full shroud of 3 points for 30 inches. They could go bigger, of course, if they wanted to, but there's no other ships behind there, so what's the point? But if they went smaller and they weren't within range at the end of movement, and they did want to fire, the range penalty would be enormous. So you kind of want to keep the shrouds tight, as tight as you can, but covering all the ships that you potentially want to attack. Okay, let's go back here and do his power, his shroud, his amplifications and stuff. So okay, let's keep this where it is. Let's say 5 and 4. We're not going to change him around very much. Now this guy, is he still a turtle? I think he's still going to turtle because this guy is super defensive. He is not combat ship. So yeah, he's going to stay 0 on amplification, full countermeasures. Okay, now the next question is, do we want to use the electronic warfare instead? Let's actually turn this off. Let's say that we haven't decided yet with countermeasures. If we're going to use the Fusion Net's electronic warfare special ability, if you recall, way back a while ago, I mentioned that if you push a point of sensor power or sensor energy, electronic warfare, into the Fusion Net, it doubles that number and gives you additional defensive fire. He can defend against 2 shots per turn because he's got a rate of fire of 2. And we don't really know what this ship has on it. I mean, we actually know it's got a lot of guns, but he doesn't. So let's say instead of doing countermeasures, he is going to push all 5 points that's left to him, right? Because he's got 8 total and he's used 3. Push all 5 points through his electronic warfare option in the fusion net. And that gives him a +10. Or actually, I should say it's a -10, right? It's a -10 defensive fire. So I'm just going to write that in there. You don't necessarily need to write it in that spot, because that's technically for shooting guns, not for defensive fire. That's for offensive stuff. Like normally you'd like maybe write it up in here or put it on a notepad or something. But you can do it here as well. So we're using up all 5 and we're doubling it to give it a -10 for 2 shots, which means its total defensive fire will be at -15 for the 2 shots that it defends against. That's actually really good. And if we were fighting against a guy who only had 2 guns, he'd be freaking unstoppable. Sadly, he's not fighting against a guy who's only got 2 guns. Okay. No weapon launch. Now to movement. So who goes first? What's our initiative? 19. So this guy goes first. He's already moving 2 points or 2 inches per turn. Do we want him to move faster? Do we want him to get up closer? He's going to turtle, right? He's going to keep turtling. So maybe he'll just stick with it. He's not going to do any thrust. So we're not going to push any thrust from the engine through the thrusters. But because inertia is a thing, he's going to keep moving. He's still going to keep moving 2 because his speed is 2. His direction is 0. He's not making any turns. Speed is 2. No pivots. Oh, and I should have done this too. Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and move him. I'm going to go ahead and grab myself another... Oh, no, actually, I don't need another vector marker. I can just use this one. All right, that's the 2 that he's moving. And then now we're going to push this one out another 2. Let me do this proper. Let me do it up from top. There we go. Push this out another 2. There we go. So that'll be in the next turn if he doesn't make any changes. So he's just moved a little bit closer. Okay, now it is the Cudgel's turn. His engine is 8-8. He definitely wants to get in there. He's going to push 4 points through the aft, which will increase his speed by 2 to bring him to 4. And he's still turning. Does he want to continue to rotate? I don't think so. I think he likes where he is. I think he likes aiming in this direction. So what he's going to do is he's going to push 1 point through the starboard thruster to stop the pivot. We're going to accelerate to speed 4. Well, no, actually we're not. Not necessarily. We are accelerating by 2, but possibly not in the way that we think. So he's already going to move 2 here, but he's also now pushing 2 in this direction. So here's what we got to do. We got to grab ourselves another vector marker. Here's my bag over here. And we're going to make it smaller because they all come in from the same bag. They're all the wrong size. Yeah. Okay. So here's what we got to do. We're going to move 2 this way, and we're also going to move 2 this way. So we have to combine them. Now, we know that he moves along 300, right? We saw that before. He moves along 300, and his 0 point is here, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take this arc wheel, and we're going to stick it over here, drop it underneath, and we're going to put this vector marker up here, and push out 2 in this direction. Boom. Now we're going to pull that away. And now his real movement is actually this. Right? Because he's moving up this way and moving this way. So now he actually moves only to here. Now, that does mean a speed of 4 because it's 3.5 inches. But we round up. We always round up on this sort of thing. So it's going to go to 4. So next turn, he'll actually end up moving a little bit farther, but that's just the nature of the game. It's not an accurate representation of true speed calculations, but for the purposes of the game, just to make it easy, we're going to do 4. You don't do 3.5 or anything like that. It's just like, that's just too much. But what this does tell us is that we now need to figure out what his new direction is, right? His new direction of travel is... Am I in the right way? Yes. Okay. His new direction of travel is the nearest 5-point tick, 5-degree tick, which in this case is 330. Okay, so his new direction of travel is 330. So down here, we write in 330. And then over here, finally, we're going to push him over to here. And we're going to vector mark 330 at 4 inches. Right about there. Boom. So next turn, that's where he'll be. Now he's still facing this way, but now he's kind of started doing this little curve, right? And if he accelerates again, it'll push him farther in this direction. Let's see how far away they are now. 20. 20.1 technically, which technically should be 21 inches, but we're just going to say it's 20. For the purposes of this, we're already an hour and 16 into this. Let's try to do some gunning things down. It's not going to work, but we're going to try it anyway because we got to do something, right? It'll actually be, honestly, it'll be the next turn where things start to really go down, because if nobody does anything different, they're going to be at 15 inches. And yeah, based on what I know about these particular weapons, that's when things start to get a little interesting. So, all right, fire determination. Now we get to start doing this for the first time, really. We're secretly determining attacks and intercepts, and determining defensive fire, declaring attacks, and so on. So, we're going to start with this guy. What can he do? He can fire through A. You can barely see it, right? It's a little too far. He can still fire through A. So the Gauss weapon could fire, but it's not gonna because it's got a shitty range. Or the one that's EFA, right? The one that's EFA, which is the pulse autocannon, he's gonna fire that. He's got a bad range. It's gonna be -1 per 2 clicks, and we're gonna pretend it's 20 inches instead of 21, which would have made it -11. Instead, it's gonna be -10. So we're gonna fire a pulse autocannon with this guy. And we're gonna do EFA, and he's gonna actually fire... Oh God, what did I do? Did I put letters and numbers in the wrong spot? Yes, I did. Dang it. Okay. EFA is going to fire twice. So the notation you should use here, you can do whatever you want, but the easiest way is to do OO. And then when you're playing on with real sheets, you just kind of fill them in when you do them so that you don't accidentally forget you've done one. I'm going to replace these with asterisks. So OO just tells us we're going to fire twice on this turn with EFA. Now, can I use defensive fire with any of these? Well, kind of, but not really. I could theoretically use the Gauss cannon for defensive fire because they can both do AB, but the Gauss cannon has no defensive fire capabilities. So he's not doing anything. They're just going to sit there. So that's what he's going to do for firing, and no defensive fire. This guy, on the other hand, what can he do? Probably not much. He can fire out of his A. You can see here. He can fire out of A. And his A guns are these 2 proton bolters. The other ones do not. The fusion shield, like I said, we're not using that, so the fact that it's DA doesn't matter. The fusion net can also fire 360 degrees, but we're using this one for defensive fire only. And that's really what it's for. There's no way we're going to be able to hit anything with this crappy ass range. So Proton Bolter can fire. I've got 2 of them, and the Proton Bolter can fire 2 per turn. And I did not turn off A, right? I turned off B because that's on the wrong side. So he's going to YOLO, and he's going to fire all of those guys. I could keep him here Where is it? I could turn one of them into defensive fire, but he doesn't know what the other guy's got, and he's pretty confident about his -10 on the fusion net. We're going to see that he's made a mistake. Well, not this turn around, actually. Not on this turn, because on this turn, there's only one gun that's going to shoot twice. So, but in the future, it's going to be a bad idea to do that. But for now, we're fine. Oh, and I should just keep this information in here just so we have it. 6-4 on the end. Okay, so 2 shots from the Proton Bolter, 2 shots from the Proton Bolter, and 2 shots from the Pulse Auto. So I'm going to start with the Cudgel. No, that's the more complicated one. I'm going to start over here. I'm going to start with the Proton Bolters here. We're going to do all 4. Now remember, these are simultaneous. They're not by initiative. So everything that happens all happens at the same time. Now, let's go. Proton Bolter number 1. Fire number 1. So here's how we fire. We come over here to this little panel, which is also just something on one of those sheets in the play aids. And we fill in the blanks here, and we get the total, and then that's our dice roll modifier, and then we roll 3d6 against it. So, silhouette. What's the silhouette that we are dealing with here? The fastest way to check that is to use the silhouette wheel. So it's this guy firing against this guy. And we need to orient the wheel to face his front. There we go. And now we track a line. And you can see this guy is long. He's long because he's got a much higher port and starboard number than his forward aft number. He's a long boy. This is a square boy. This is a long boy. So we are looking at the long ring. There's a long box and wide. So we're looking at the long ring. In this case, it wouldn't have made any difference anyway, but the long ring tells us it's hitting forward aft. That's what these little marks here, forward aft. If it were hitting over here, it would be port starboard, or over here, port starboard, but it's going straight over to here, forward aft. So we're going to use the forward aft number, which upside down is 2. That's his silhouette. That's how easy he is to hit, which is to say not as easy as if we were facing the sideways. Now we get our amplification value, which for this guy is 0. He's not amplified his shroud in any way. Now we look at our accuracy for the Proton Bolter. It's a +1. 1. Now for the shitty ass range, right? So we've got range of -1 per 2 clicks. We decided, because I am the god of the game, I get to say that that's 20 inches, even though strictly speaking by the rules it would only be 21. It would be 21 because it's 20.1. So it's just past the 20 inch mark, but we're gonna say 20. So that's a -10 because it's -1 per 2 clicks. -10. Now we check the ECM that the enemy is fielding. Countermeasures, 4. -4. Any evasive maneuvers? No, because evasive maneuvers really only function for small vessels, like fighters and shuttles and so forth. So that's always going to be 0 in this game. DF, defensive fire. Is this guy doing any defensive fire? No, he is not, because he cannot. So that is going to be 0. There are no other features. He doesn't have shields. That ship doesn't have shields. This one does, but the Cudgel does not. So nothing there. So let's look at our absolutely atrocious dice roll modifier. 2 + 1 is 3. -4 is -1. -10 is -11. I can tell you right now that ain't going to work, right? Because the highest number we can get is an 18. We rolled a 12. -11 is a 1. Anything below an 11 is a miss. Anything above an 11 is a hit of some kind. But sadly, no hits. No hits for shot number 1. Now, I could go through all of these, the remaining 3 shots, all of these numbers are going to be the same. So we're just going to put him out of his misery because the highest roll he can do is an 18, which gets us a 7, which is below 11. So he shoots all 4 of his shots. They all miss. Oh, and I got to get my music back on. Wow, we're at an hour and a half here. Wow, I've never made a video this long. But hey, I'm having fun. I hope you're having fun. When people are actually still watching it at this point. All right, let's take a look. So we're firing the 2 pulse autos. So for this one, we start with the silhouette. Silhouette on this guy, it's 2 and 4. Let's see. Oh no, he's not boxy. Oh no, he's not. No, he's just shaped port to starboard. Oh yeah. Okay, so he's still this way. Okay. So forward aft is 2, port and starboard is 4. So we know from this, most likely we're looking at the forward and aft, but we'll see. Just to do our due diligence here. Yep, he's a long boy. In fact, I'm realizing now, I should probably change this around because he's a long boy. When I update my playtest, I'm actually probably going to make him forward, core, and aft instead of port, core, and starboard. Or I will make the silhouette 3 and 3, so to make him a little bit more square. That's probably what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to make him 3 and 3, so that he'll be a box instead of a long boy. But that's okay. For now, we'll just play him as he is. So we're doing a 2. Amplification is 5. Accuracy is 2. The range on this guy, again, 20 inches. -1 for 2 clicks, so we're going to say it's a -10. Now here is where it gets interesting, right? So ECM on this guy, he has none. He didn't put any down, right? No countermeasures. No evasive maneuvers. But defensive fire and shields is where it gets interesting. So I forgot to mention this earlier. I forgot to do this because I wasn't thinking through how we would want to normally do this, because it's obviously what these are doing. I've been talking about it this whole time. Back up here, we would have declared the attacks and the defensive fire. So what I should have said before anybody did any shooting was, this guy is going to defend against 2 shots from over here using his fusion net gun. Right? I should have said that when everybody declared their attacks, but I'm the only one playing, so I kind of knew what was going to happen in here. So that's what he's doing. He's using his 2 shots on the fusion net to defend against the 2 shots from that cannon. He gets a -10 because of the boost that we did for the electronic warfare, and another -5 because it has the natural -5. So the defensive fire on this guy, oh, not that guy, over here, is -15. And on top of that, this guy has shields. He's going to be hitting the front, but technically, because of the way he's built right now, port and starboard, remember, Russian doll system, so core is on the inside, port's on the left side, starboard's on the right. If we're looking at this, we're hitting just on the left-hand side, right there, which means the left side deflection shield uses its 5 points of deflection as a -5 to the DRM over here. So how bad is this? So we got 5, 7, 9. -10 is going to be -1. -16, -21. No way. Best we can do is 18. No damage. I mean, no hits at all. Not even possible, right? So, we didn't quite have anything happen in this turn in terms of firing, but we now kind of know how it works. Next turn, as they get closer, one of them's bound to hit. Pretty sure one of them's going to hit, and then we'll probably get damage. But we are going to hold off on that for right now, and we are going to leave it as it is. When we come back, we're going to do more power allocation. We're going to do more moving. We're going to maneuver. This guy is he's getting pissed off. He is super pissed that he got nowhere near hitting this guy. So he is going to just going to burn like crazy. And he's going to make his way over this guy. This guy is going to keep turtling because he's scared as shit right now. Because that gun's scary. He doesn't know anything yet. There's bigger guns coming his way. We're going to leave it at that. So thanks for watching. See you next time.